Today's feast of the baptism of Jesus completes the Christmas season. At Christmas, God reveals the most important truths that we need to know. Truths that can change our lives, should change our lives entirely. First, God reveals to us who He is. And second, God reveals to us who we are. So first, God reveals to us who He is. Many in the world today struggle to understand what God is like. Some even go and question whether or not God even exists at all. Maybe we even have moments about, what are you doing, Lord? If God does exist, as portrayed in the Scriptures, sometimes people see the way God looks like in the Old Testament, and they might say that maybe God's a tyrant. He just imposes rules. He wants to control our lives. And they say, well, we don't see any kind of evidence for this kind of a God in our world today. And in a sense, we could agree with them partially, because Christmas reveals a very different kind of God. Not a God that's a tyrant, but a God who is love. Christmas is about God revealing the fullness of His love to us by entering into our world. And not just through the mighty works and signs and wonders that He did in the Old Testament, but also by becoming one of us. At His birth, God takes on our human nature so that our humanity can come in contact with His divine nature. So last Sunday as well, at the Epiphany, the adoration of the Magi, it represents how Jesus came to show Himself not just to one people, but to all nations, were to come and adore Him. And today, at Jesus' baptism, it reveals to us the wonder of the life of God Himself. You see, from the very beginning, God started giving hints of who He was in His fullness. The very beginning of creation, God's breath swept over the waters, and God said, "Let us make man after our image and after our likeness." I don't know if you've ever noticed, but He says, "Let us make this." Well, there is an us in God, in a sense, and that's what we find revealed here at Jesus' baptism. As Jesus comes up out of the waters of the Jordan River, we see the Holy Spirit descending upon Him, and the voice of the Father that says, "You are my beloved Son." And so this is the clearest moment that we find so far in the history of salvation, where God shows the us of Himself, that He is three persons in one God, that He is Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Very clear at Jesus' baptism that all three of them are here. The Trinity, this relationship of love in God Himself among the Father and Holy Son and Holy Spirit. We discover that at this moment, God is love. So the first thing we learn is that God reveals who He is. And the second, I said, is that at Jesus' baptism, God reveals to us who we are. Because this too is also easy to get confused about who we are. There's so many questions about identity out there today. So many different voices in our world trying to tell us this is who you are. But at Jesus' baptism, God reveals to us who we really are, who He's created us to be. Because the events that surround Jesus' baptism are also symbolic of what happens at our baptism, when we were baptized. At Jesus' baptism, He descended into the waters of the Jordan. And at our baptism, water was poured upon us. At Jesus' baptism, the Holy Spirit descended upon Him. And at our baptism, the Holy Spirit, in fact, the whole Trinity came to dwell in our soul. At His baptism, Jesus was proclaimed to be the beloved Son of the Father. So too at our baptism, we became adopted children of God. At Christ's baptism, the heavens were opened, it says. And so too, through our baptism, heaven was open to us. After His baptism, the gospel says today that Jesus prayed. And so after our baptism too, we enter into a life of relationship with God, especially through prayer. As Christians, we go down into the water with Jesus in order to rise up with him, reborn of water and the Spirit, now become God's beloved children that walk in the newness of life. So who am I? What makes each of us who we are? You are a beloved son. You are a beloved daughter. And so what the Father says to Jesus here, he says to you as well. You are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. So just think about that. Think about how God being pleased with you. Do you really believe that? Do you believe that God could be pleased with you? I think sometimes we find it hard to believe that. There's so many times, Father, that I screw up. I do things wrong. I make mistakes. And yeah, that's true. It's true. We make lots of mistakes at different times. And God is not so much pleased with sin, certainly not. But even when we do that, it can't change the fact that you are still loved by him. Even though we're far from perfect in this life, he is still pleased that he has made you. God is pleased to always help us come back to him. And so as your priest, Father John, and I, we know that we ourselves are not Jesus. We're kind of more like John the Baptist, maybe, telling you the words of the one that is mightier than I. So for many of you, we know something of the difficulties, the struggles, your failures, and also, at the same time, your desire to follow the Lord, your goodness, and the care that you put into your families and your parishes. And so as your priest, I want to make sure that you really hear what the Lord is saying to you today. That you are his beloved son. You are his beloved daughter. He is well pleased.